I've shared with you, Shayne, that I was trained in balanced literacy and whole language. And it wasn't until I went back and became a speech pathologist that I actually learned what I needed to know as a first grade teacher. Mm-hmm. So I love that focus on teachers. And I wonder if you can share some findings from your own work. And I believe it was some of your earlier work with Dr. Carol Connor mm-hmm. and colleagues, where you found an interaction between teacher knowledge and practice with an evidence-based curriculum and student achievement. So can you first speak to what an interaction means in research and what it meant in your specific study?
Sure. And that's a tricky term, even for other researchers sometimes. So mm-hmm. what an interaction means is that a combination of two factors, could be more than two, but let's just do two. So a combination of two factors is more meaningful than considering either factor alone. Okay, that's really abstract. Let's talk about that, what that can really mean. So in this particular study, I was very interested in both the roles of teachers' knowledge about language and literacy and the extent to which they were providing evidence-based decoding learning opportunities in their classroom. And so we first looked at, did teacher knowledge by itself predict students' literacy learning? And then did teachers' use of evidence-based decoding practices predict children's learning? And actually the answer was no. Neither of those on its own actually was associated with kids' literacy learning on some basic word reading measures. Then we considered the interaction, because I was thinking to myself, well, you can have knowledge and not actually enact that in your classroom. Right. And you could also enact some of these practices, but perhaps the way it's being enacted is not informed by a great deal of professional content knowledge. And so maybe the adjustments that we would hope to see for certain children or things like that might not be happening. And so that's when we considered the interaction between both of them. And what we found is that for students who had more knowledgeable teachers, more time in that explicit decoding instruction, what predicted stronger word reading gains. So high knowledge, high use of explicit decoding practices, better outcomes. However, for students who were in classrooms of less knowledgeable teachers, more time in explicit instruction was actually associated with weaker skill gains. So lower knowledge, but more in explicit decoding instruction, kids were not benefiting from that in the way that they were when they were in a classroom that had a highly knowledgeable teacher who was probably leveraging that knowledge in how that explicit decoding instruction was being enacted.
That is it's such a powerful finding, because when I think about, again, using myself as an example, I was left a screener in my desk from the prior first grade teacher, and it had rhyming on it. And so I was administering this screener, but I was like, why do we care if they can rhyme? That's like nursery school stuff, right? I had no idea about phonological awareness at the time and whatnot. And so I'm just thinking about my own self with, I was administering a screener, which is a great concept, right? At the beginning of first grade, let's screen for letter sound knowledge, rhyming, some of these basic skills, but I didn't understand why I was doing that. So similarly, they could have been using this curriculum, but to your point, they didn't necessarily understand how to adapt or personalize or why they might have been focusing on certain things. So you didn't see that translate to the higher word reading scores. That's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it was not something we were initially expecting. We thought there'd be both these direct associations, and then we did hypothesize about the interaction and needing both knowledge and practice. But the way that panned out was surprising to us, and I think does convey an important message. And we've continued some of this line of work in since then. So I've collaborated with Dr. Rachel Schachter, and she looked at associations between knowledge and practice. And what she found was that she used a special kind of analysis called quantile regression. So we are working with Dr. Jessica Logan on this. But she found that really the associations between knowledge and practice were at that high level. So only for teachers who were implementing lots of these evidence-based practices and spending lots of time on literacy did they see any connections at all with teachers' knowledge. So we're really seeing this idea that it's not just knowledge, it's not just practice. We really have to think about how these things fit together to produce better outcomes for kids.